here in black uniforms. They got International Crimes Enforcement Police badges. They have black uniforms and they got vehicles. Their tags read Honorary Pro Counsel. Now you guys look up and see what a counsel is. A pro counsel is a guy who rules you. Look it up in a dictionary. Pro counsel. The pro counsel in Jesus' time was, I think it was Pontius Pilate. He was ruling the show, okay, for the Roman Empire. He said, but on the back of their car they have little oval stickers, S-L-O-V. I said, Slovenia? Did not the National Guard letter say Slovenia was going to have those troops in Colorado? And we're talking about Denver? Oh. And he says, but Al, I'm a cop. And he says, I'm into guns. And he says, those guys are packing Makarov pistols. They got Makarov holsters on their hip. Uh-oh, it's taken now 4 years from the time they were issued until the time they until the time that they showed up in America until the time that they're issued, all right? So think about that. This is the kind of stuff, and this prepositioned equipment is all over the United States. I told you that in 2004 we took pictures of 4 armed personnel carriers in the 4-H camp at Biddinger, Maryland, up in Garrett County. I took those photographs to the sheriff, and I showed them to Rick Sanders. I said, Sheriff, you ever seen these? Yeah, they're APCs. Uh-huh. You know where they are? He says, no. I said, they're in Biddinger, Maryland at the 4-H camp. How'd they get there? Don't know, Sheriff. You're the sheriff. See, that's why I wrote this sheriff in Libby, Montana. He's about 15 or 20 miles from Eureka, where this thing happened. And he knows that those South American troops forced those farmers off their land at gunpoint, set up a bayonet course, and proceeded to stick the dummies with their bayonets, and left a couple hanging from the trees as calling cards. So that's what we're talking about, what's going on. Now let me talk to you about something else. Paul Wellstone, as you know, was killed in a plane crash. He was a senator from Minnesota. About 2 months before he died, and just before the vote on the war in Iraq, which was the end of 2000, I got a call from a businessman in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and he said, I've got Wellstone's secretary's personal address. I want you to send him some of your best stuff. So I sent him about 6 or 7 pages to this secretary, and he was obviously able to read it. He ended up voting against the war in Iraq right after 9/11 happened this was in 2001. He voted for this war in Iraq, the one where they took off in March 20th of 2003, where they sent all the Marines in the desert in green uniforms. Someone said he was the only one that voted for it. I cannot confirm that, but everybody was hyped up about what happened in New York City at the towers, so he voted against the war in Iraq. And Paul Wellstone got paid off. He had a friend suddenly die, and the setup was that he had to take an airplane. He didn't like to fly. And I know from reports that the plane was a Beech Turbo King Air. It was turning final approach, and they saw a blue flash in the back of it. The cables were cut, so it was a barometric detonator. The plane crashed, and he was killed. So that's what happened to Paul Wellstone. Now, here's something you didn't know, and I'm going to tell you. This is how these people work. And this is why the Bible says these days are terrible days like never been before and never going to be again. In 1978 in Virginia, we had a gubernatorial campaign coming off. And John Warner and Elizabeth Taylor had gotten married and lived in Middleburg, Virginia. That was a marriage, if you all can remember that. Some of you there, it's been, 30 years ago, 32 years ago, 31 years ago, that this convention took place. And a fellow named Harold told me, he said, this is what happened at the convention. On the first convention where about 12,000 people attended. It's usually the first Saturday in June. Richard Obenchain was the nominated, favorite son, got the nomination for the GOP nominee. His plane mysteriously crashed that night. Uh-oh, there's the plane crash, huh? Somebody's running domestic policy again. But anyhow, they had a convention the following week. They had to have a convention. Nobody had a game plan, though, and 500 people showed up. No one had a game plan. So the executive committee, who were running the convention, opened the floor for nominations. And Elizabeth Taylor nominated John Warner. Now, I was told that by a guy right here in town who's very knowledgeable. Well, they said, wait a minute, well hold on, what's going on here? I mean, who, John Warner? Well, he served a little bit with the Ford administration, I believe as Secretary of the Navy. It's an appointed position. He may have had some enlisted time in World War II, I'm not sure. They said, wait, we got to have an executive session. So they went into executive session. After a while, they come back and said, okay, we'll let that go. It's okay, we'll let it go. We'll let it ride, okay. Okay, well, then, has anybody got a second to this nomination? And I was told, and again, I'm telling you, Elizabeth Taylor seconded the nomination. They were both voting members of the state of Virginia, living in Middleburg at that time. Of course, they've since divorced. But then they had well, wait a minute, hold it. They had an executive session again, and it stopped. Says, okay, we'll accept that, and so they did. And John Warner got the nomination, sort of by default. Nobody else had a game plan. They had nobody else, no idea. They had nobody of any stature, and they kind of fit, so they let it happen. Now, I moved to Virginia in 1989. In 1995, thereabouts, there's a lady named Helen down here who is big in party politics. She's got a big estate. And I was sitting at the Country Cooking one day. Now, I knew her because I'd been over to her mansion in her big estate because we had ice cream socials over there for Republican candidates. That's back when I thought politics could help things. And I didn't realize that it's just the Democrats' turn to public trough, and before, the last 8 years, it's been the Republicans' turn to public trough. Anyhow, I got to see this lady and got to meet her, and I saw her one day eating at the buffet at the Country Cooking. And I walked up to her and I said, hi there, and I started talking to her. Now, she, at one point in time, she was pretty well off. She's got a huge estate. And I said, well, let me talk to you about the New World Order. And I said a few things, and all of a sudden, she said, you know what? A strange thing happened in 1978 at the second convention. The morning of the second convention, John Warner and Elizabeth Taylor came to my mansion, my estate, my house, as I was getting ready to go to the convention, and she was apparently one of the members of the executive committee. And he told her, he said, look, we'll take care of Mrs. Obenchain's expenses if you'll get me the nomination. We'll pay all his funeral expenses and everything like that if I can have the nomination. And that's how it was done. So that's the kind of things that we're looking at, folks. And let me read one thing here about what Obama and Secretary Shinseki of the Veterans Administration are doing to our veterans and moving this whole thing towards euthanasia. There's a fellow out there who they passed a book out for the veterans, and it's called Your Life, Your Choices. And the book openly encourages euthanasia and was written with the guidance from the group formerly known as the Hemlock Society. Now, that's the ones that want you to take hemlock, you know. Hemlock is what one of the Greek philosophers took and it killed him, okay? That same pro-suicide group now boasts on their website of directly leading the charge to ensure end-of-life counseling as mandated in Obamacare H.R. 3200. On page 21 of Shinseki, General Shinseki, he's retired Army Chief of Staff, by the way, Veterans Euthanasia book, all military veterans are encouraged to complete a checklist of various scenarios to decide whether their own life would not be worth living, quote unquote. For example, the book asks veterans 7 questions. They want them to sign a living will that authorizes doctors to terminate your life if you are, 1, living in a nursing